friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a card using a whole bunch of Lawn Fawn sets, including Elephant Parade add-on, Ocean Elphie, Berry Rainy Day, You Are Sublime, Would You Be Mine, Totally Awesome, and Happy Harvest. This is another card for our current Lawn Fanatics challenge, which is inspired by a book, movie, or song, and I chose the children's book An Elephant Knows Best, which I will talk about a little bit more later on in the video. But for now, I've stamped my images out in jet black ink on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. Starting with my elephant, and the closest colors that I could come to with the elephant on the cover was the warm grays. So I'm using W00, W1, and W3. And the elephant on the cover has some darker areas on the inner part of the ear with some little lines in it. So I'm going to color him a little bit differently than I would normally, just because I am trying to use that illustration on the cover as my inspiration. So I'm starting with my W3, laying that in for any shadows wherever I want those to go. For his head, since his head is turned up toward the left, the light is going to fall on his trunk and the top part of his face. And then on the lower part of his body, it's facing toward the viewer and actually a little bit twisted toward the right. So the shadows are going to be different, and I did those a little bit more equal on both the left and the right. I'm blending out the W3 with the W1, and then I'll come in with the W00 to fill him all in, and try to keep him in those light, warm gray tones. I didn't want him to get too dark. Once I have him all filled in, I'm going to go back to the inner part of his ear and try to emulate that cover. Like I said, I just kept it up on my phone. I took a screenshot of it, and I would refer back to that so that I could get as close as possible. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect representation. For one thing, the elephant in the stamp is facing the opposite direction than the one on the cover. But I'm going to get as close as I can. It's supposed to be, you know, kind of honoring the item that you choose, whether it's the book or the movie or the song. It doesn't have to be an exact copy. So I did add in W5 to deepen up those lines on the inner part of the ear. I am going to go back to those and soften them out a little bit as well. And I'm going to color the rock down toward the bottom with these same shades. But I started with the W5 and then blended out with the W3 and the W1. So I left off the W00 on the rock just to make it look a little bit different. So I did have to work back and forth a few times on that ear to try to get it to look similar. It was something very different, like I said, than anything I would normally do. But I really liked the illustrations of the book. That's why I chose it. It's not even a book that I was aware of when my children were little. I wish I had been, because I think the message of it is really lovely. But it's something that I just came across and fell in love with the illustrations. I'm a huge lover of illustrations in children's books. I follow a lot of illustrators on Instagram, and it's just something I've always been drawn to. I really love people who can draw as someone who can't do that themselves. But anyway, I'm moving on to my frog, and I decided to go with some G20s. I'm using G20, G21, G24, and G28. The G28 is going to make him a little bit darker than the frog on the cover, but because I have so many things that are going to be green in this scene, I just wanted to set him apart a little bit. So I started with the G28, blended out with the G24, filled in with the G21, and then I left a little spot on his belly and the center of his mouth and on his eyes for that G20, which is really nice and light. And I think this combo altogether is just really dynamic. So I went ahead and did that, and then I'm going to color the lily pad in the same tones. The frog is not going to be sitting on the lily pad, otherwise I would have colored it differently to separate them out a little bit. but I just wanted to have echoes of the same shades in different images across the scene, so I decided to color it in the same tones. So the book is written by Sue Samuels and illustrated by Danny Deeptown, and it's about a little elephant who's kind of feeling down on himself because of his very long nose, and he's kind of comparing it to the other animals in the forest and seeing how their noses are so useful for them. And he turns to his father and starts asking questions about why his nose is so long, and so his father tells him all the things that he is able to do with his trunk. So it's basically just a message about accepting who you are and loving yourself, and I really liked the relationship between the father and the son as well. I think typically you see more board books or children's books that are illustrating the relationship between the mother and the child, so it was really nice to see one with a father and a child, and the father is being a good role model for him. So anyway, I'm moving on to my fish, and I'm coloring it like the fish on the cover in some turquoise shades using BG10, BG53, and BG57. The fish also has a few little stripes on its back, very light, so I went ahead and added those as well. And then I'm going to also color in the little splashes that you see that are going to go all above the elephant's trunk in the photo. So I'm using the same shades for that. And I didn't catch it on screen, but I did color in the little fly's wings with the BG10, just a little tiny touch of those. I did that eventually. For the rest of the fish, for its face, I went with purples, again, to just copy the fish on the cover, which is very similarly drawn to this one. So I went with V22, V25, and V28 for that. And I did do a second layer just to deepen that saturation. Then I'm going to give all of my animals some rosy cheeks and add a little pink to the inside of the elephant's ear. On the cover it's very subtle, but I kind of zoomed in and I could see a little bit of pink in the ear. So I went ahead and added that using R11 and R20. And then on the elephant, I decided that it wasn't faded out enough, so I'm going to add in R00 as well, just to help all of that blend on his lighter skin tone. Next, I'm going to use YG41 and YG45 for the grasses. I just wanted to use an assortment of greens. There's some different plants on the cover of the book, and some of them look similar to these images and some of them are a bit different, but I just tried to pull in whatever greenery I could find in my stamp sets, which is one of the reasons I ended up using so many. Next up is G40, G43, and G46 for these more viney plants. I started with the G40, and then I'm adding a little touch of G46 close to the stem, which I will blend out with the G43 just to keep some separation there. I like to give them a little extra accent. I think it just gives them a more dynamic look to have that darker core, I guess, right towards the stem. And then for the other kind of sea grasses, I'm using YG00, YG01, and YG03. I wanted something that was a bit more yellow toned, and so I pulled together this combo. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to go back with the YG03 and add a little extra darkness there because I felt like the depth got a bit lost. Then for the branches, I'm using E53 and E55, just the two little shades there because it's such a thin area to color. Then I'm going to grab my Black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that started off to the side, and I'll go over the eyes of my three critters to make them nice and bright and shiny. Just give them a little bit of a raised detail, and then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to be using the Cloudy stencil from Lawn Fawn. And I'll be starting with some shaded lilac distress oxide ink. The cover of the book has a little bit of purple mixed into the blue of the sky, so I wanted to be sure to add that in. Also, I think purple and the gray of the elephant look really lovely together. I'm going to blend out some of that shaded lilac with some speckled egg distress oxide ink. I'm not trying to actually get them to blend together. I just want to incorporate both of them in different areas of the sky to kind of match that book cover. So I'm going to turn my stencil and continue down that panel, always starting first with the shaded lilac, and then going in with a bit of the speckled eggshell, bringing that down the sides, and just trying to add a bit of that into the whites of the clouds. You can see I'm spacing my clouds out quite a bit so that I have room for a little bit of that extra color with the speckled eggshell. So I turned my stencil once again to make sure that I got a new cloud formation, and I'm going to do one more section of these. I didn't need to go down too far on the panel because I have a number of other elements to add in, but I do want to add a little extra color to the bottom just so that last row of clouds isn't stark white, and I want to give it that same dreamy hazy look as the rest of the clouds. So I did want to do a little splatter detail on this just to add some extra interest. This isn't on the cover, but I just wanted to make it my own a little bit, so I'm going to press both of those inks onto an acrylic block, add a little bit of water to them to make them a bit more fluid, and then I will splatter that all over the background. I did the shaded lilac first, and then also some of the speckled eggshell. Not too much of it, just a little bit here and there, and then I'll set that panel aside to dry. And then I cut down 3 more pieces of Bristol, one with the grassy border, one with the stitched simple wavy borders, and then one with the simple stitched hillside borders. So I'm going to use each of these to make up the remaining elements of my scene. I'm going to start with the simple stitched hillside border, and that is going to be the pond or lake or whatever the elephant is sitting in on the cover. And to color that in, I'm starting with the speckled eggshell distress oxide ink again, and then I'm going to add in some salvage patina down at the bottom and kind of blend these two together. I wanted it to be softer at the top and darker on the edges, and then have almost like a soft glow in the center. So I haven't put any ink in the center yet. I'm going to fill that in with the speckled eggshell, and then I'll go back to the salvage patina and just darken up those edges again and work back and forth until I'm happy with how that's looking. And then I will set this panel aside to dry. Next I'll work on the grassy border, and for this one I'm going to use some Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink. And I'm going to put that one down at the bottom, and then I'll bring in Mowed Lawn for the top. And I'm just being really careful how I blend that on so I don't bend those grasses. Just trying to be gentle with them so, I don't get all these little creases in the cardstock. So once I have a good layer of the Mowed Lawn on there, I will go back to my Twisted Citron and just blend those in a bit better. And then I'll set this piece aside to dry and move on to the Stitched Simple Wavy Borders. And for this one, there is a little patch of earth between the water and the grass that has this kind of pinky brown tone. So I started with spun sugar, and then I'm going to add in some gathered twigs. And it's kind of a weird combination, but it was the closest that I could get to that cover. I did go back to the spun sugar and blend that out a bit, and most of the pink part of that is going to get covered up later on anyway, but it just has that little hint of it, which I hope makes sense. I did use the ocean wave accents to cut a few little waves into that water piece. So I'm just peeling off those post-it tape pieces and setting those dies aside. And now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to use the water as a placeholder. I can't glue that down just yet. You'll see why in a minute. But I can start gluing in the other elements by tucking those behind that water. So I'm going to put the grass down first, and then I'll take that patch of earth and I'm going to tuck that in back behind the water as well, and just have a little bit of that peeking over the edge. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to add my little images to the waves before I go ahead and tear that down, because I need those little spots to be open. So I'm using the elephant in the largest one at the top and just using some post-it tape to tuck them in the back. And then I had this rock that I wanted to put in this second one over to the left. It wouldn't fit coming in from the top, so I decided to go in from the back instead and kind of pull it through the hole, and that worked pretty well. So I just I'm going to add a little bit of post-it tape again just to hold that in place while I add my glue, and you'll never even see that it was there. And then the third ripple is just to kind of show where the fish is leaving the water as he's leaping out, as he is on the cover. So now I can glue those down. I didn't press the elephant down too hard though, because I had all of these little pieces that I needed to tuck in. There's all these tall yellow plants on the background. This was the closest I could get to that look. So it is using the corn from the Happy Harvest stamp set, but I'm hoping once I get all the other plants in there, it'll just look like some tall yellow plants, not necessarily corn. I'm not adding any like corn cobs to it or anything, so hopefully it gives it that look. But I couldn't think of any other plant in my Lawn Fawn stamp arsenal that was similar. I did stamp these out using some fossilized amber distress oxide ink, and then I'm just tucking them back either behind the grasses or behind that hill of earth there. So I wanted them to be at various heights, so I'm just kind of varying where I put them down. I'm going to trim one of these down to make it a little bit shorter, because I didn't have a ton of room to tuck them in since the glue was already dried. But I am going to just tuck that in back behind the grasses to make it a little bit shorter, because I need room for my sentiment up at the top, so I needed to save that space. And then this last one I'm going to tuck back behind the elephant in the center just to fill in that empty spot there. And that's why I didn't press his head down completely. Now I can go ahead and adhere that. So for the rest of these images, I was just kind of playing around with them and trying to figure out where they should go on the scene. I knew where I wanted the frog and the lily pad and the fish to go, but other than that, it was just kind of trial and error, testing things out in different places. Like I said, at this point, it's not going to look exactly like the cover of the book, but I still wanted to get as close as possible. But I took a little bit of liberty, especially with the plants, because they're not exactly the same as the ones on the cover. So I'm adding that lily pad over toward the right hand side a little bit more, and then I'll have the fish leaping out of the waves that are cut out in the water. And then I'm just kind of tucking some little plants. There is like this little tree-like plant kind of sticking out of the water on the cover. So I tuck that back behind the fish. And like I said, the rest I'm just kind of playing around and seeing where things will go and trying to fill in empty spaces and just make a pleasing look, you know, trying to balance things out. I put one of those tall vines over on the right hand side, so I'm going to put another one over on the left. And I tried to adjust my elephant just a little bit because there was a little point of something kind of sticking out. I guess it was one of those tall yellow plants sticking out right at the edge of his trunk there, so I just wanted to remove that. Some of the things I did have to kind of pull up and adjust, shift over a little bit when possible. And like I said, just try to space things around and not put them too close to something that was similar so that you get a more interesting look. So once I'm done arranging all of the plant life, I am going to also add in the little splashes of water on the cover. He's got a little spray coming out of his trunk, so I'm going to add that. And then I'm going to save the flies that are in there for later on. For now, I'm going to pop this in my Misty so I can stamp my sentiment. I'm going to go with fish tank ink because this was the closest to the title of the book that I could get. And I also went with a large sentiment to kind of emulate that title. And I took that from Elphie Selfie. And then I'm also going to take some little like bee trails or fly trails in this case and stamp those out on the sides using narwhal ink. So it took me a minute to figure out exactly where I wanted this second one to go and which direction because I didn't want them to look too similar, but I ended up figuring out how I wanted that. So I'm just closing the door of my Misty to pick that up and then stamping that down again. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my Misty. I'm using Lawn Fawn Peacock cardstock, and I'm stamping again in that fish tank ink. And I chose the elephant and sentiment from Elphie Selfie, and then the little frog is from Very Rainy Day. So now I'm ready to adhere this card front to the card base. I'm going to glue that to cover the entire thing. So just lining up those corners and making sure it's on there nice and straight. And then I'll bring in those two little flies and I am going to glue those right at the ends of the little trail. So I have one that is kind of coming down with the wings facing up, and then I'm going to flip the other one to give it a little bit of a different look. So on the book it's actually bees, but I didn't have any tiny bees, so I substituted the flies. But there you can see a comparison from the book cover to the finished card. All I'm going to do is add a little bit of Stardust Stickles, and I just use a tiny bit on the fly's wings. And then I also wanted to have it in one other place, so I decided to put it on the top edge of the water just to give that a little sparkle, just so there's a little extra something when you tip this card into the light. And that is going to finish this one off. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to pick that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and give you another look at the inside as well. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button, leave me a comment down below, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Your support means the absolute world to me, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. All of the products that I used will be listed and linked down below. It will be a very long list. There was a lot that went into this one. But yeah, check that out if you're interested in picking up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.